When pioneers moved to the west with courage strong, they met the test. They pushed their handcarts all day long, and as they pushed they sang this song. For some must push and some must pull as we go marching up the hill. So merrily on the way we go until we reach the valley, oh.
Always kind of overwhelming to see people come to Wyoming. We've never had anything that anybody wanted to come see. I've lived here all my life, and they see I-80 and that's all they want to see of Wyoming. And some venture as far as Yellowstone and the Tetons, but Central Wyoming has never had anything of any interest to anybody. And to have all the people that have come is a very humbling thing for us. We didn't intend for this to happen. We didn't seek for this to happen. It just happened. This stake, the Riverton, Wyoming stake, is the borders of it are Fremont County. It's one of the largest stakes in the church. It takes about 4 hours to drive across it. There are only about 30,000 people in our stake, of which we represent about 10 to 12% of the population. I grew up in Casper, Wyoming, which is just 120 miles from here, and because of growing up there and being close to Independence Rock and Martin's Cove, learned about the Handcart people. It really all started for me some of these things are kind of hard to talk about. So if I get a little emotional, just stay with me, because it's just the way I am. I was 6 years old in a primary class, and we had a teacher by the name of Rhea White, and she could tell primary stories, or pioneer stories, so well. I believed that she was with them. I just knew that Sister White was part of the Martin Handcart Company because she told them with such feeling. One day she brought a picture to primary class. One of the pictures is of a family in Martin's Cove. You can tell by the picture that the man who painted it had never been to Martin's Cove, which wasn't that unusual because at that time nobody got into Martin's Cove. There's trees and large trees and hills and things that don't exist in Martin's Cove. But there's a painting that's there, and she showed us the painting, and tomorrow in the visitor center over at the Sun Ranch you'll see the picture. There's a man leaning up against the wheel of a handcart with one arm around his wife and another arm around one of his children. And there's a small boy standing there in the snow looking at them. Sister White told us that the man had just died and that's why the wife and the child were crying, because he would have to be buried and they would have to pull the handcart. For some reason that picture just got a hold of me, and I couldn't stop staring at it. Sister White noticed that I was staring at it, and she said, "Scotty, what are you looking at?" And I said, "I'm looking at that little boy." And she said, "Well, what do you think he's looking at?" And I said, "He's looking at that man's boots." And then she asked me probably the hardest question I've ever been asked. She said, "If you were that little boy, would you take that man's boots?" 6 years old, that's a tough question. Been taught not to steal, been taught to be kind. Would I take that man's boots? I said, finally, after a pause that seemed like forever, I said, "Yes, Sister White, I would take his boots." And that was my introduction to the Martin Handcart Company. She said, "That's right. The man would want you to take the boots." She showed us in the picture that there was still wear left in the boots. She said he didn't need them anymore, and he would want someone else to have them so that they could wear them all the way to Salt Lake and keep their feet warm. That impression never left me. Years later, after studying the history of the church, after having served a mission, completed my undergraduate at Brigham Young University, I found myself attending University of Nebraska for a master's degree. I was called to be the Elders Quorum president, and one of our assignments was to go and clean the graves at winter quarters. It wasn't all fancy then like it is now, and we'd go over and mow the weeds and pull weeds around the graves. And one of the men in the quorum said to me, he said, "Do you know where Rock Creek Hollow is?" And I said, "I don't have an idea. I don't know where it is, nor why." And he said, "Well, it's in Wyoming." And I said, "Well, tell me a little more about it. Wyoming's a big place, you know." And he said, "Well, it's where the Handcart people froze to death." And I said, "I've been there. I know where that is, and it's by Independence Rock." He said, "No, there was 2 companies." I said, "You're wrong. There was just one. I've been where they froze." And he said, "No, there was 2. I went home and got out my history of the church again, started reading again, and sure enough, there was the Willie Handcart Company. 3 months went by, and I completed my graduate studies, began to look for a job, found a job in, of all places, in Riverton, Wyoming. I never wanted to move back to Wyoming. I wanted to live in Colorado. But there was just exactly the job I wanted right here. I went to the stake president and said, "President, you need to call a new elders president." He said, "Why?" I said, "Because I'm moving." He said, "You can't move." I said, "I have to. I'm done with school. I quit my job. We gave up our apartment." He said, "You can't move." I said, "Why in the world can't I move?" He said, "Well, I was going to talk to you Sunday anyway." And he reached in the desk and pulled out the papers, and he said, "You've been called to be the bishop of your ward." I said, "How can I be the bishop? I don't even have a place to live." And we talked about it for a while. I was 25, and you know, you don't get that calling very often in your life. And I thought, you know, who's got the inspiration here, me or the stake president? Maybe we need to stay. He visited with me for a while, and then he said something profound. He said, "I don't know why, but something tells me you have to move to Wyoming. And always remember this, it's not important that you serve as a bishop. It's important that one time in your life you were worthy to be a bishop." We moved our family here and spent the worst 3 months I've ever had in my life. I didn't have a church job. I wasn't even a home teacher. And I thought, you know, maybe the stake president was right. Maybe we shouldn't have come here. I was called to the High Council. 3 months later, the stake presidency was changed, and 20 years ago tomorrow, I was called to serve in the stake presidency of this stake at the age of 27. I served for 9 years. One of the first things I did when we got here is I started asking everybody where Rock Creek Hollow was, and nobody knew. Finally, I found one lady. Her name's Donna Guard, and she said, "I believe I can get you there. I went there once as a little girl." She was in her 50s. The 4th of July, 1977, she took me and my family, my one little daughter, and we went to Rock Creek. And I felt something at Rock Creek that I had never before in my life felt. I didn't know what it was. I interpreted it as the little children who were freezing to death and crying. I didn't understand what it was, but Rock Creek was like a magnet. I just couldn't let it go. I went to the stake president that Sunday and said, "President, Pioneer Day is just a few weeks away. We've never celebrated that in this stake, and we need to. He said, why? We don't get the day off like they do in Utah. And I said, it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be on the 24th. But the closest Saturday there is, let's go to Rock Creek and celebrate Pioneer Day. And he said, where in the world is Rock Creek? He said, it's up on top of South Pass, out in the boonies. He said, nobody will come. He said, what's so important about Rock Creek? I said, that's where the Willie company froze to death. He said, there's nobody in this stake that's going to go up there. I said, President, they'll come if we feed them. And he said, we don't have the money to feed them. And I said, can we just have the Pioneer Day and I'll take care of the rest? And he said, sure, go ahead and announce it. So the next Sunday, which was 1 week before the celebration, I had it announced through the whole stake that we were going to celebrate Pioneer Day at Rock Creek Hollow, and the stake was providing dinner. The stake president called me into the office, and he said, I know you're just a young kid, but when I tell you something, that's the way it really is. And I said, well, what's wrong? I couldn't figure out what he's upset about. And he said, you said they were going to feed the stake. And I said, we are, but it's not going to cost anything. He said, no, you can't do that. I said, yeah, don't worry about it. You'll never get a bill. What I did was I went to every sister I could find in the stake and asked them to make 1 loaf of whole wheat bread. And if they were real generous too, we bought a big sack of raw onions and some milk. And we went up to Rock Creek, and that was our first dinner at Rock Creek Hollow. We had a slice of whole wheat bread, a slice of onion, and some milk. And we wanted to be authentic pioneer, you know. And there's sisters in the stake who still have not forgiven me for that because their kids' stomachs were so sour that night. But the same thing that happened to me happened to the stake. There was 500 and some odd people there that night, and everyone fell in love with Rock Creek. We didn't know why. We just did. Everyone went there when they had time. We celebrated Pioneer Day there for 7 years. We did everything wrong. We had the story wrong. The historical facts, we had them all fouled up. We trespassed on people's property. We did everything you can imagine. We did it, and we did it wrong. But we were having a lot of fun being wrong. After 7 years, the land ownership changed hands, and we were locked off of the Rock Creek property. We continued to hold Rock Creek at different places in our Pioneer Day, at different places in the stake. The stake presidency was changed, and after 9 years of being a counselor, I was called to be the stake president. The first conference 6 months later, that was the stake president's conference, I was the concluding speaker because I was the presiding authority. I got up and said my talk, and at the very end of the talk I said this. I said, as your stake president, I would ask you as a stake to pray about the Willies project. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen, and sat down. My first counselor, President Kitchen, leaned over to me and he said, what in the world is the Willies project? I said, I don't have a clue. I don't know. And he said, you just asked the whole stake to pray about the Willies project, and you know what it is? And I said, I don't know. It was really kind of scary. For 2 years, a little over 2 years, as we traveled around the stake as the stake presidency, we'd visit primary and different things. And the little kids would get up in primary and say, Father in heaven, please bless President Lorimer so that he can understand the Willies project. We had old people praying about the Willies project. Everybody was praying about the Willies project, and nobody knew what it was. Not even the stake president. I told my counselors after 2.5 years of this that, you know, maybe we ought to write the brethren in Salt Lake and tell them they needed to come and release us, because we had 2,000 people praying about something and none of us knew what it was, and it hadn't happened yet, so maybe we were wrong. And my counselors looked at me and said, no, let's just keep going. And so we did. And it was very, very humbling to have this army of people praying about something just because you asked them to. Everybody interpreted it that it was that we were supposed to buy Rock Creek. So we saved a lot of money. We saved all the money we could from the stake budget, and we had enough money to buy Rock Creek. Then that letter came out from Salt Lake City. Anyone who was a bishop at the time remembers the letter well. It said, there are no more stake budgets. We're going to give you an allotment from Salt Lake City. And then the fine print said, and by the way, if you have any extra money in your coffers, please send it to Salt Lake. Well, we had a decision to make. Do we buy Rock Creek, or do we be obedient and send the money to Salt Lake? It took about 5 seconds. We wrote the check out and signed it and sent it in. We thought we finally had understood it and we had the money to do it. And now all of a sudden we didn't have the money anymore. So what was the Willies project? We didn't know. About that time we had a couple go to the Family History Library mission down in Salt Lake City, and they came back with a CD-ROM that we'd never seen before. We'd never seen one at all. And they also had a printout of each one of the members of the stake presidency's genealogy. President McKinnon was not near as embarrassed as the other two of us were, because he had a lot more done than we did. He didn't do it, but he had more done. And we realized we needed to get our genealogy done. But President McKinnon got all excited about getting some of those computers that would take CD-ROMs to do family history. At that time in our stake, we had 2 ladies, older women, who did genealogy. Nobody else in our stake even knew how to spell genealogy. But he decided we needed not 1, but 2 of those computers. So we started writing Salt Lake, and we wrote to the folks in the big white building and said, you know, we're from Wyoming and we want 2 computers. And they'd write back and say, there's only 5 of these in the church, and they're all on the Wasatch Front. You can't have one. So we'd write back and say, but we really need them. We didn't know why we needed them. We just thought we did. And they'd keep writing back. Then they'd say, you're on the list and you're number 9,482, you know. And someday before the millennium, you'll get your computers. So we kept doing this. And finally, President McKinnon got so perturbed with the whole process that he took a day off of work and drove to Salt Lake City. And instead of going to the Family History Department, for some reason, he went to purchasing. And he said, I'm not leaving here until you guys fill out the purchase orders and get us 2 of these computers with the CD-ROMs. We got to have them. And Brother Alan Reddish in purchasing didn't know what to do. So he filled out the purchase order, and he said, okay, you'll get them. And President McKinnon came back to the stake presidency meeting all excited. Said, man, we're going to get these computers. This is going to be great. We got a letter the next week that said, it was a mistake. You can't have them. It's not going to happen. The next week, it was unbelievable. I came home from work, and there was boxes all over my living room. 2 complete computer systems, the printers, the keyboards, the screens, the CD-ROMs, everything we needed. 2 complete systems. There were 7 in the church, and we had 2 of them in Wyoming. I mean, it was unbelievable. So we thought, well, what are we going to do with these now? We got them. We don't have anybody doing genealogy. So we went over to Lander and set that one up over there, played around with it for a while, found ourselves, so we knew at least how to run the thing, kind of, sort of. And we left President Kitchen there to teach the family history librarians how to run it. We didn't know how to run it. And President McKinnon and I went out to the Wind River branch. That's our Lamanite branch. We had some business to do out there. And we were driving out there. It's about 15 miles out to the branch. And President McKinnon was sitting over in the passenger side of the car, and he began to feel a little guilty about what we'd done. He said, you know, why did we push so hard? He said, you know, maybe this time we went a little too far. maybe we don't need these computers. You know, the church has spent a lot of money on us, and we don't even have anybody doing genealogy. And he was over there saying things like that. And in a form of communication that I had never before experienced, I knew why. And I turned to him and I said, President, it's the Willie people. And he said, what in the world made you think of that? I said, I don't know. But their temple work is not done. Now that was an absurd statement. It was impossible. How in the world could these people, whose story's been told all over the world, of dedication, devotion to the gospel, sacrifice, how in the world could they not have their temple work done? It was impossible. Intellectually it was impossible, but spiritually I knew what I knew. We did our business at the Wind River branch. I'll tell you a little funny thing that happened there. We were starved. Our days in the stake presidency usually start at 5 a.m. and they end at somewhere between 10 and midnight. We very seldom eat anything. We never are home. And so we get hungry during the day, and although I'm the stake president, I also am the scrounger, and I'm always able to find us something to eat. That day at the Wind River branch, President McKinnon was working on the computer, and I went in the kitchen, and there was a whole box of ice cream and an apple pie. So I cut the apple pie in half and put half on each plate, put it in the oven and warmed it up, and then put ice cream on it, and took it in. President McKinnon says, where in the world did you get that? I said, don't worry about it, just eat it. And he said, did you steal this? I said, the PFR manual says you're not supposed to leave food in the church. So whoever left this in here shouldn't have done that. So just eat it. We're helping them keep the rules. So we were sitting there wolfing down this apple pie a la mode, and we thought we were all alone in the building when we went in there. But the branch president, who's a large laymanite, came in, and he caught us just red-handed. I mean, and he's standing there at the door. His name is Louis Twitchell, and he just shook his head, and he said, once a deacon, always a deacon. So we ate our pie, and we hurried up over here to Riverton, and we put the computer together here in the Family History Center. And President McKinnon said, we don't even know their names. I said, yeah, I know, but we have a picture of a marker that's at Rock Creek, and you'll see the marker at Rock Creek. It's a little granite marker that Paul Willie, who's a direct descendant of James Willie, gave me in 1979, and I had an Eagle Scout put it up at Rock Creek. On that marker are the names of the 13 plus the 2 who died at Rock Creek. So I came down to the stake president's office and was rummaging through all the old stuff we had and found a little photograph of that marker. Went back down to the Family History Center. President McKinnon by then had the computer together, and he said, give me a name. I don't know why I gave him the name I gave him. Maybe it's because I have 6 daughters. But there's only one little girl buried at Rock Creek. So I said, look up Bodil Mortensen. So he typed in her name. We waited and we stuffed in and out the CDs. And I will never, ever, ever forget the feeling that came over us as we saw that screen come up with her name and no temple ordinances. We all react to things differently because of the way we were raised. President McKinnon is a very accomplished violinist. He's played his violin all over the world. He's a school administrator here and doesn't play his violin much anymore. I, on the other hand, grew up playing football played college football. I was so excited when I saw that. I jumped up and said, President, if all of this is for this one little girl, if all these prayers for 2.5 years are for her, it's been worth it. And I slapped him on the back and he knocked him clear out of the chair. And we both were having a real hard time controlling our emotions. He crawled back up in the chair and said, give me another name, just don't hit me again. I looked at the list again and said, look at James Kirkwood. He looked up James Kirkwood, same thing. We then had confirmed to us from the most recent technology we had from the church that the spiritual feelings we'd had on the way to the Wind River branch were correct. We were still worried about it, though. We met here as a stake presidency the next morning at 6 a.m., and we submitted all 13 names the old way on the little cards to see if the church could figure out the same thing we had. We sent them in. We didn't tell them what we were doing or who they were. We just sent them in. We waited and waited and waited. 4 weeks went by, and a letter finally came. And it said we were right. Then we knew that we had a responsibility. We knew that we as a stake had been given an unbelievable opportunity to be of service. We wondered, how do we do this? The first 13, when we processed those names and got clearance to do them in the Ogden Temple, we invited the High Council and their families to come down and do the temple work for those 13. Whoever could go. It was during a work week day, so it was hard for some people to get off of work. But we made sure that we had enough names for everybody to do a name. The kids to do the baptistry work and the adults to do the endowments. As it turned out, there was enough names that each one of our children could be baptized for one of the Willie people. And there was enough for each member of the stake presidency to be baptized. We did the baptisms, the 3 members of the stake presidency. We took our children down in the font and baptized them. Those people were there. They were so thrilled to be in the house of the Lord, having their work done for them. Emotions were really hard to control. But when we baptized each other, I remember baptizing President Kitchen. You know, they only made one of him. He's been with me for the whole 12 years, both of them have. Plus President Kitchen and I were together for 6 years before that, and he's just a great, great man. The measure of President Kitchen is in children. I have never seen a child afraid of President Kitchen. He loves children. We'd sit here around this table doing the research, and he'd be sitting over here. Those were 18, 24-hour days. He'd be sitting over here after not having eaten anything for that time, and you'd hear a giggle over here, and you knew what had happened. President John Levi Kitchen had found a child buried at sea, a child lost on the plains. When I baptized him, I thought of the children. When I baptized President McKinnon, I thought of the intellect, the spirituality of this great man. He's so obedient. If the Lord commanded him to take his son to the mountain and sacrifice him like Abraham did Isaac, he would. He's just a magnificent individual. When they baptized me, we have a lot of fun together too. President Kitchen held me down on the bottom of the fount. Wouldn't let me up. That caused a little bit of a disturbance. And then when President McKinnon got ready to baptize me, he said, President, just go straight down, just go straight down, just please, just go straight down. He said, I'll never get you out of here if you don't. So we had some fun with it, but it was an incredible experience. When we got out of the font, we were in the locker room, and we were having so much fun. We were like little deacons again, you know, saying, "Whoa, was that cool or what?" You know, and this temple worker came back and he said, "Brethren, this is the house of the Lord, and you need to be reverent." And then he saw who it was, and he says, "Oh, I'm sorry, you guys can do whatever you want." We said, no, we need to be reverent just like everybody else. But we were so excited to finally get to do those baptisms for those people. It was really something. As it turned out, James Kirkwood didn't need to be baptized. The initial CD-ROM was wrong. He had been baptized. We had to do the other work for him, but he didn't be baptized. Bodil, I gave my second counselor, President McKinnon, the names and said, "President, you assign them however you want. I only am going to assign one of them." And he said, "Which one?" And I said, "I want your wife to take Bodil's name through." They never, ever lived in the shadow of a temple that was done. They couldn't go do it. Then it was assumed by family tradition that it was all done. But it wasn't. And so when we sealed little Bodil to her parents, I'm sure if we would have opened our eyes and been able to see with spiritual eyes, we would have seen her. We didn't, but I'm sure we would have if we could have. That little girl, she's a very special little girl. She has touched the hearts of prophets and common people like me. She's become the sweetheart of our stake. This one, of course, is of Bodil and James Kirkwood going over Rocky Ridge. It's got an interesting story behind it. A priest by the name of Phil Neberker came to me in 1994 when we were working on Rock Creek, 1993. He was running a backhoe, and he jumped off the backhoe, and he came over to me. He says, "President Lorimer, I really want to go on my mission." I said, "Well, there's no reason you can't, is there?" He said, "No." He said, "I'm worthy." I said, "Well, let's fill out the paperwork." He said, "I can't." I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, you know, my brother Doug's in Bulgaria on a mission, and my family can't afford two of us at the same time." I said, "Well, heaven's sakes, that's not a problem. There's a lot of people in our stake that would love to help you." He said, "President, I don't want to be a welfare case." I said, "That's not being a welfare case. We want to help you." And he said, "No, I can't do that." He said, "All I want to ask you is if I promised the Lord that I would save my money, do you think he would make a way available for me to make enough money to go on my mission?" And one of those times that you do as a stake president, I said, "Phil, I promise you, as your stake president, that will happen." He got back on the backhoe and kept working. A few weeks later, he was out sage hunting or elk hunting or something, and he got trapped in a blizzard with his buddies. They were out there for 3 days. Almost froze to death. They're in a cave, and they had their watches, and they'd have the buzzer go off on their watch every 15 minutes, so they'd have to rotate in this cave, and that's the only thing that kept them alive from freezing to death. The Fremont County Rescue people gave up on them, so members of our stake went out and found them, brought them back, took them down to the hospital, and they had some frostbite and a lot. Sent them home. Well, Phil couldn't sleep because every time he'd start to fall asleep, he'd have nightmares about freezing to death, and he'd wake up. So his family would find him out in the living room at night, in the middle of the night, carving blocks of soap and all kinds of junk, just whittling with his mom's paring knife. And he carved a horse's head out of a block of soap that won first place in the Winter's Fair. So in October of 1995, he calls me up and he says, "President Lorimer, are you going to be home after conference?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, I got this thing I want to show you." So he comes over with this thing. It's on his mom's cutting board, and it's a block of beeswax. I said, "Phil, I didn't know you did this kind of stuff." He says, "I've never done it before." He says, "But I just want you to look at it and see if it's okay." I said, "Well, looks great." I said, "I assume this is Bodil and Jens Nielsen and James Kirkwood and Joseph Kirkwood." He said, "That's right." He said, "They're going over Rocky Ridge." He said, yep, that's right. I said, well, it's great. I said, but Phil, we can't help you as a stake finance. And I said, we bought the molds for this, but we don't have any money to do this. He said, oh, no. He says, I don't want any money. He said, I just want to know if they look okay. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, look at their faces. He said, do they look like they look like? I said, I don't know what they look like, but I'll look at them. So I looked at them. I said, yeah, they look okay to me. He said, that's all I wanted to know. He picked up his mom's cutting board and left. And next thing I knew, he had gone down to Spanish Fork and found a foundry that would cast this for him. And his dad was upset with him because he'd taken all the money he'd saved for his mission and cast this thing in bronze. But he had it sold to his bishop, so he was okay. So he went down to pick it up. And the guy at the foundry said, you know, has anybody at the church seen this thing? He said, no. He said, you really need to take this up to the church office building and show them. He said, I don't need to take it to the church office building. He says, no, really. He said, I know Glenn Leonard, and you need to take it up there for the sesquicentennial. So he called Brother Leonard, and we knew Brother Leonard. Phil didn't know him. Called Brother Leonard, and Brother Leonard agreed to see him. So he went up to see Brother Leonard, and he's in his Levi's that have holes in them, and an old woolen shirt that has holes, and tennis shoes. And he's carrying this bronze. And he goes in the great white building, and he goes up to where they go, where Brother Leonard was, and he gets to Brother Leonard's office, and Brother Leonard meets him at the door, and he says, I started thinking about it. And I said to myself in my mind, Riverton, Handcarts, Hinckley. He said, you need to go see President Hinckley. This kid from our stake says, I don't want to go see President Hinckley. He said, I already called him, and he's waiting for you over there in that granite building. So this kid from our stake goes over there in his grubbies with his bronze to see President Hinckley. He sets it down on the table, and President Hinckley gets down on his hands and knees and crawls around and looks at their faces. Stands up and says, how much do you want for it? And the kid says, it's not for sale. And the President says, why isn't it for sale? He said, because I sold it to my bishop. And the President put his arm around Phil and he said, young man, I promise you, your bishop's going to understand. So he wouldn't tell him what he wanted for it. So President finally just got his personal checkbook out and wrote him a check. And he said, I want my wife to have this for Valentine's Day. And gave him the check and said, is that enough? And it was way more than Phil ever dreamed of selling it for. And Phil said, yeah. He said, that's fine. He said, I guess I better get out of here. So he left, came home with his check, and had another one made. By the time he actually went on his mission to Portugal, he had his mission paid for,